Hello everyone, my name is Nadia. In this video, we will discuss about process costing part 2 and spoilage and process costing. We will only do the exercises and you can access the materials from Evony's channel. I will put the link in the description box. Basically, this tutorial is similar with the previous one about process costing. What makes it different is now we have transferred in costs and spoilage in the calculation of process costing. So let us jump into problem 1. We will calculate the transferred in cost in process costing using the weighted average method. Hindi Company is a manufacturer of car seats. Each car seat passes through the assembly department and testing department. This problem focuses on the testing department. For your information, when we do the process costing that have transferred in cost, it means that we are calculating the process in the second department or the following department, such as the third department, the fourth department, or maybe the last department. We will not have a transferred in cost in the first department because there's nothing to be transferred in the first department. And direct materials are added at the end of the process. Conversion costs are added evenly during the testing department's process. As work in assembly is completed, each unit is immediately transferred to testing. As each unit is completed in testing, it is immediately transferred to finished goods. Hindi Company uses the weighted average method of process costing. Data for the testing department for June 2020 are as follows. So this is all the information for the Hindi Company. And we are required to calculate the equivalent units for each cost category. In the previous video, we only have 2 cost categories, direct materials and conversion costs, but now we have 3 cost categories. The additional one is the transferred in cost. Okay, so now we will calculate it first. Starting from the beginning work in process, we know that from the information box, the physical unit for beginning work in process is 60. And the transferred in during current period is 100 from here. And so we can calculate to account for is to add the beginning work in process with the transferred in during current period. And then we have 160. And after that, we will compute the completed and transferred out during current period, which is 120. And the ending work in process is 40. So here we have the accounted for is 160. So keep in mind that numbers and accounted for and to account for will have the same amount. And now we will calculate the equivalent units. So for the completed and transferred out during current period, it is obviously 100% because everything that is complete and will be transferred out means that it has reached the end of the process, that is 100%. So for the transferred in costs, direct materials, and conversion costs, everything will have 100%. So it results in 120 for the 3 cost categories. But for the ending work in process, we will have to take a look at the information table here. The transferred in costs say that degree of completion for ending work in process is 100%. Therefore, we will compute 100% times by 40. And the direct materials here is 0%. So 0% times 40. And for the conversion cost, that is 75%. And after this, we can calculate the equivalent units by adding the completed and transferred out with the ending work in process. So for the transferred in cost, we have 160, direct materials is 120, and conversion cost is 150. Next, we will calculate the total production cost. First, starting with the beginning work in process, we have information about it, 60,000 here. And the direct materials is 0, and the conversion cost is 24,000. And next step is to add the cost added in current period. The information is also given in the table. That is 117, 27 and 62.4. And now we can have the total cost to account for is adding the beginning work in process cost with the cost added in current period. Okay, and don't forget to also calculate for the three cost categories here. Alright, next step is to calculate the costs per equivalent units. So since we use the weighted average method, it means that the cost incurred to date is same with total cost to account for. So we have 177 for transfer in cost, 27 for direct materials, and 86.4 for conversion cost. And the equivalent units is from the step 2. And now we can calculate the cost per equivalent unit by dividing the cost incurred to date by equivalent units. Now we will assign this cost to completed and transferred out and to ending work in process. So to calculate this for both completed and transferred out and ending work in process is to have cost per equivalent unit times with the equivalent unit for the completed and transferred out, which is 120. And same goes with the direct materials and conversion costs. We will have cost per equivalent units times with the equivalent unit for completed and transferred out indirect materials. And then it goes the same with the conversion costs. And for the ending work in process, now we will multiply the cost per equivalent unit with the equivalent unit and ending work in process. Okay, so after this, we can calculate the total cost accounted for by adding the completed and transferred out with the ending work in process. And here, don't forget as well to calculate the three cost categories. So to make sure that your calculation is right, the numbers in total cost accounted for and the total cost to account for must be in the same amount. Number 3, we will prepare the journal entries for June 2020, the transfers from the assembly department to the testing department and from the testing department to the finished goods. Since we are transferring this from assembly department to the testing department, it means that in the debit side, we will have work in process in the testing department. And in the credit side, we will have work in process in assembly department. And for the numbers, we can have it from here. The total cost to account for 177. And for the second journal, we will transfer from testing department to finished goods. So in the debit side, it will be finished good, and in the credit side, it will be work in process testing department. Since we will calculate the cost of goods completed and transferred out, so we only use this number, the completed and transferred out one, which is 228. Okay, that is from problem 1. Moving on to the problem 2. Refer to information in problem 1. Suppose that Hindi company uses the FIFO method instead of the weighted average method in all of its departments. The only changes to problem 1 under the FIFO method are that the total transferred in costs of beginning work in process on June 1 are 45,000 instead of 60,000. It means that here the numbers are changed to 45,000 and the total transferred in costs added during June are 114 instead of 117. Starting from the beginning work in process, we have the physical unit of 60, transferred in during current period is 100, so to account for, we have 160. And since we use the FIFO method, remember that when we want to calculate the completed and transferred out during current period, we will have to divide it into from beginning work in process and started and completed. We know from the beginning work in process we have 60 physical units, and The information about the completed and transferred out during June is 120. Therefore, we can fill this number, that is 120 minus the beginning work in process. And for the ending work in process, we have 40. And to account for here is to sum the numbers above. So the accounted for and to account for is in the same amount. And now we are going to calculate the equivalent units. Also remember, when we want to calculate with the degree of completion for the beginning work in process, we calculate the rest of the percentage of the degree of completion. So for example, here we have 100% in transferred in cost. It means that when we calculate here, it's 100% minus the 100% from the information here. That is 0% times the physical units. And for the direct materials, since in the information is 0%, therefore we calculate here is 100% times the physical unit. And for the conversion cost, the rest of the 50% is also 50% times with the physical units. Next, about the started and completed. Everything in the started and completed will have 100% because they have complete all the process. So for the direct materials and conversion cost is 100% as well. And for the ending inventory, now we also have to take a look at the information table. For the transfer in cost, we have 100%. And for the direct materials, we have 0%. And for the conversion cost, that is 75%. And now we can calculate the equivalent unit. We have 100 in transfer in costs, 120 in direct materials, and also 120 in conversion costs. Next step is to calculate the total production cost from the beginning work in process first. Remember that the number has been changed into 45,000. The direct materials is still the same, 0, and the conversion cost is 24,000. And for costs added in current period, we have 114, 27, and for the conversion cost is 62.4. So now we can have the total cost to account for is to add the beginning work in process with the cost added in current period. And also don't forget to sum for the 3 of the cost categories. Next step, we will calculate the cost per equivalent unit. And since we use the FIFO method, remember that the cost added in current period is from the cost added in current period only. It means that it is 114, 27, and 62.4. And the equivalent unit is from the step 2 that we have calculated above. And now cost per equivalent unit is cost added in current period divided by the equivalent units. And the last step is when we want to assign this cost to the beginning work in process, started and completed, and also to the ending process. In the beginning work in process, basically it's the same with the step 3 that we have calculated, and the direct materials is 0, and the conversion cost is 24,000. And now, cost added to beginning work in process in current period. To calculate this, we have to multiply the cost per equivalent units with the equivalent unit that is in the beginning work in process in this current period. So we will have this number, and total from beginning inventory is to add from the beginning work in process with the cost added to beginning work in process in current period. And now, moving to the started and completed. Cost per equivalent unit multiply with the equivalent unit that is started and completed in this period. Now we can calculate the total cost of units completed and transferred out. And for the ending work in process, it's the same by multiply the cost per equivalent unit with the equivalent unit in the ending work in process. And now we have the total costs accounted for is to edit the total cost of units completed and transferred out with the cost from ending work in process. And also don't forget to sum the three categories here. And now to make sure if your calculation is right, is to have this amount is the same with the amount in the step 3. Now for number 3, we would like to journal the cost of goods completed and transferred out from assembly department to testing department. So in the debit side, we will have work in process, testing department, and in the credit side, we will have work in process from assembly department. And since we are using the FIFO method, the numbers for the work in process that is transferred to the next department is from the cost added in current period, that is 114. And for the journal B, cost of goods completed and transferred out from testing department to finished goods inventory. So we will have finished goods in debit, and in the credit we will have work in process testing department. And since we want to calculate the cost of goods completed and transferred out, we will have to pick the number from the total cost of units completed and transferred out here. And that is all for problem 2. Here in problem 3, we are going to do the process costing with spoilage with a weighted average method. Just like in the job costing, the process costing also has a spoilage that is divided into normal spoilage and abnormal spoilage. And now we're going to take a look first for the spoilage using the weighted average method. In the seafood company's packaging department, conversion costs are added evenly during the process and direct materials are added at the end of the process. Spoiled units are detected upon inspection at the end of the process and are disposed of at zero net disposal value. All completed work is transferred to the next department. The transferred in costs for May equal the total cost of good units completed and transferred out in May from the cleaning department, which were 90.9, and the summary data for May is as follows. For the packaging department, use the weighted average method to summarize the total cost to account for and assign those costs to units completed and transferred out, to abnormal spoilage, and to units in ending work in process. Basically, the step is the same with the previous step. So we start with the beginning work in process. We know that the physical unit here is 12.6 and started during current period is 24.6. Then we have the to account for is beginning work in process added with the started during current period. That is 37,200. And now the goods unit completed and transferred out during current period is 26.4 here. And the ending work in process is 8.4. And we know from the table, normal spoilage as a percentage of good units is 8%. Remember that the percentage of this normal spoilage is from the good units, not from the total units. Therefore, we will have to calculate the 8% here with the good units. So we get the normal spoilage is 2112, and for the abnormal spoilage, it is still unknown, but we can know the information for the accounted for, that is the same amount with to account for here. So we can calculate for the abnormal spoilage by subtracting the accounted for by ending work in process, normal spoilage, and also goods unit. So we have the abnormal spoilage as 288. And now to calculate the equivalent units, starting with the good units completed and transferred out during current period means that it has completed all the process. So we have 100% for all the cost categories here. And for the spoilage, of course, for the transferred in cost, it will always be 100%. But for the direct materials, if the rate of spoilage is higher than or at least the same with the degree of completion in direct materials, the spoilage will have 100%. But in this case, both the direct materials and the inspection point are added at the end of the process. It means that they are in the same degree of completion, so we will have the direct materials here as 100%. And so for the conversion cost. And for the abnormal spoilage, the same rule is applied. In the transferred end cost, of course, it is 100%. And in the direct materials, it will also 100%. Another tip as well is to take a look at the information table here. We have the degree of completion of normal spoilage is 100% for all the direct materials and the conversion cost. And now to the ending work in process. Here we have the information that the transferred in cost is 100% times the physical units, and the direct materials is 0%, and for the conversion cost is 40%. So now we can calculate the equivalent units. We'll have 37.2 for transferred in cost, 28.8 for direct materials, and 32.1 for conversion cost. And now we are going to calculate the total cost. Starting from the beginning work in process, we know the total cost for transferred in cost is 33,698, and the direct materials is 0, and the conversion cost is 23,475. And next is the cost added in current period. We will get the information from here, the total cost added during May. But for the transferred in cost, they have already stated the numbers here. That is 90,922, and for direct materials is 5,760, and for the conversion cost is 4,845. And then we can calculate the total cost by adding the beginning work in process with the cost added in current period. Also, don't forget to calculate the total cost for the 3 categories. And now, moving to the calculation for cost per equivalent unit. Since we are using the weighted average method, it means that cost incurred to date is the same with the total cost to account for here. And the equivalent units is the same with the previous calculation. And now the cost per equivalent unit is to divide cost incurred to date with equivalent units. Okay, so the last step is the assignment of cost. If there is no spoilage, we will only need to calculate the good units completed and transferred out and for the ending work in process. But since there is spoilage in this calculation, it means that we have to add this actually 3 row, cost before adding normal spoilage, and abnormal spoilage. Okay, so start with the cost before adding normal spoilage. The formula is the same. It is to multiply the cost per equivalent unit with the equivalent unit that is completed and transferred out during current period. And then for the normal spoilage, multiply the cost with the equivalent unit for the normal spoilage. And here we will have total cost of good units completed and transferred out, added with the normal spoilage. And for the abnormal spoilage, we will have 3.35 multiplied by the abnormal spoilage. And for the ending work in process as well. So now we can have the total cost accounted for is to add a total cost of good units completed and transferred out with the abnormal spoilage with the ending work in process. Okay, so here don't forget to calculate the 3 of the cost categories. Okay, and to make sure, the amount here must be the same amount with the total cost to account for in step 3. And that is for the problem 3 about spoilage with the weighted average method. And to shorten the duration of the video, I will not discuss the problem 4 because the calculation for the spoilage is the same. The difference is that we are using the weighted average, and in problem 4 we will use the FIFO method. But I will give the answer in the answer set. Okay, so now we are going to move to problem 5, our last problem. Okay, so now in the problem 5, actually it is also about this spoilage and process costing using the weighted average method. But what differs here is what if the inspection point is different with the degree of completion. Okay, so here Patakulo is an automotive spare part manufacturer. Each product is processed in 3 consecutive production departments, which are cutting department, assembly department, and finishing department. All good units from cutting department will be transferred to assembly department. In assembly department, so we are here in the second department, direct materials are added when the process is 70%. The inspection point is at 90% stage of production. Normal spoilage rate is 5% of all good units which have passed the inspection. All good units will be transferred to finishing department. The company uses the weighted average method of process costing, and below here is the information. And we are required to first calculate the equivalent units. Starting from the beginning work in process, we know from the information table here it is 5,000 and transferred in during September is 10,000. Therefore, to account for is we have 15,000. And now for the good units completed and transferred out during current period is 12,000 here. And the ending work in process is 2,000. So now we have to calculate the spoilage. We know from the information here that the normal spoilage rate is 5% of all good units. It means that we can calculate it by multiplying 5% with the good unit. And here the accounted for is the same with the to account for in the previous calculation. And now we can calculate the abnormal spoilage by subtracting the accounted for with the work in process ending, normal spoilage, and good units completed and transferred out. But actually there's another way to calculate the spoilage here. So to calculate the total spoilage is actually to add the units in beginning work in process, that is 5,000 here, with the units started in this period, that is 10,000, and then subtract it with the completed and transferred out, that is 12,000, and ending work in process, 2,000. So we will have 1,000 for the total spoilage. And since we know from the information that the normal spoilage is 5% from the good units, so we can calculate it first. The normal spoilage is 600, and then we can have the abnormal spoilage as 1,000 minus 600. So it will result in the same amount. So it's up to you which way you are more comfortable with. And now we're going to calculate the equivalent units for the good units completed and transferred out during current period. It will always be 100%. And for the normal spoilage here, for the transferred and cost, it will also be 100%. Okay, now for the direct materials. Pay attention to the degree of the completion of direct materials. Here we have 70% and the inspection point is 90%. It means that when the inspection is held, the direct materials are already added. Okay, so Since the direct materials are already added, we can now calculate the spoilage here for 100 times the physical units. But for the conversion cost, since it is added evenly, it means that the rate of the conversion cost will follow the inspection rate, that is 90% times the physical unit. And the same rules apply to the abnormal spoilage. In the transferred in cost, we will have 100% and direct materials also 100%, but in the conversion cost, it will only be 90%. And for the work in process ending, here we have the information for the work in process ending. Transferred in cost is 100%. And now for the direct materials, it means that the direct materials are already added. So we can calculate it as 100% here. And the transfer in cost is 75%. So now we can calculate the equivalent unit by adding all this. Okay, and moving on, we're going to calculate the total production cost. From the beginning work in process and transferred in cost, we have 150,000. Direct materials are 0 and the conversion costs are 50,000. And for the cost added in the current period is 450. Direct materials is 750 and and for the conversion cost is 986,800. So we have the total cost here is by adding the beginning work in process with the cost added in the current period. And also don't forget to calculate for the 3 categories here. And now, since we are using the weighted average method, it means that the cost incurred to date is the same with the total cost to account for. And the equivalent unit is the same amount that we have calculated previously. And now for the cost per equivalent unit is to divide the cost incurred to date with the equivalent units. So we have 40 for transferred in cost and 50 for the direct materials and 72 for the conversion costs. And now the last step is the assignment of cost. As stated in the previous problem, we now have the cost before adding normal spoilage and the normal spoilage and also the abnormal spoilage. So here we're going to multiply the cost per equivalent unit with the equivalent unit in the goods completed and transferred out. And same goes with the normal spoilage. And here we have the total cost transferred to finishing department. And now for the abnormal spoilage is to calculate the cost per equivalent with the equivalent unit for the abnormal spoilage and also for the ending work in process. Okay, so I think this is typo. It should be 600 units and here should be 400 units. Okay, so now we can calculate the total cost accounted for is to add the total cost transferred to finishing department, added with the abnormal spoilage and with the ending work in process. Also, don't forget to calculate for the 3 cost categories. And to make sure whether your calculation is right or not, is to have the same amount for the total cost accounted for with the total cost to account for in step 3. And lastly is about the journal entries. First, here we want to record transfer of good units to finishing department. It means that in the debit side, we will have work in process in finishing department. And in the credit side, is our current department, that is assembly department. And for the number, we can get it from the total cost transferred to finishing department here. Okay, and the abnormal spoilage, it's the same with the job costing. If you have the abnormal spoilage, then you will have to record the loss from abnormal spoilage. And in the credit side, it is work in process, assembly department. And for the number here, it is from the abnormal spoilage here, 61920. Okay, that is all for problem 5. And it is also our last exercise in this video. If you have any further questions about this materials, please feel free to ask your tutor. Thank you.